Voila! I'm back from Texas. It's God's comic Brad Stine, and this is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide. In a cacophony of clarity, tonight, J. Warner Wallace with his brand new book, The Truth in True Crime. We've had him before. People said bring him back immediately, and especially they said we won him back not just on June 10th, but on June 10th because, yes, it is in fact Wyatt's birthday. Very merry birthday to you. Very merry birthday.
Okay, so I just want to point out, you have played what is potentially the last song you should ever play on someone's birthday.
Why?
What do you mean, why? Do you even know what that song you're singing is from?
It's from Alice in Wonderland.
Exactly. And why would you think they sung that song?
Was that because the Queen was going to cut off their head?
No.
Was that because the Queen was going to give them an enema?
No. That was the song the Mad Hatter, the rabbit guy, and the mouse sang "We're Doing the Tea Party." Now, do you know why they sang it?
They were drinking hallucinogens.
Maybe in the original book, but in the Disney movie, no. It was because it wasn't any of their birthdays. Hence, an un-birthday song. You have basically picked the one song that you're only supposed to sing when it isn't someone's birthday, and you've used it now.
I didn't understand.
And now you look the fool.
I just was. Well, your sister said you should sing this song to her because she said that she sang it to you and you were annoyed. So I thought I might as well
but I was annoyed at the grammatical inaccuracy in using it.
Gotcha. Well, folks, I am so excited. This is Wyatt's birthday. My son is 28 years of age. He's getting older and over, almost 30. 2 more birthdays to go, Wyatt. When you turn 30, everything goes downhill. Everything goes sideways. Just kidding. I loved my 30s. I wonder what has been your best decade now? Was it your single digits? Was it your young preteen, teen, your early 20s? What do you think? Can you think of what was your favorite time in your life, Wyatt?
Truth be told,
no,
not really. It's all of getting to be a blur to me. It's like each of those areas was like a segment of my life. But now that segment's over with, it's just like I've moved on from them.
But there's not any time you can think of in your life you said, oh, that was a good time. Oh, I liked doing that. I like being a senior in high school. Oh, I liked my first year of college.
I just liked being able to sleep in until 2 without anyone complaining.
Where was this?
I don't know. I assume it happened at some point.
Are you talking about in school when you were supposed to be working?
No, I'm talking about when I was at home. Not having to worry about school. Sleeping in until 2.
You know,
with no one complaining.
I got to tell you something, son. It's funny you should bring that up. I am really tired. It's been a 10-day tour, which has had a much better impact than a 3-hour tour that the Minnow had many years ago in the 60s. You wouldn't know what I'm referencing, of course. But it's Gilligan's Island. They had a 3-hour tour.
Yeah.
And
wasn't the Minnow the ship?
The Minnow was the ship, and they had the captain sit right down, and you hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailor man. He wasn't. He was Gilligan. He was an absolute waste. The captain, sure and true. The mate was a mighty sailor man. Skipper, brave and true. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the Minnow would be lost. The ship's ashore on an uncharted isle. Anyways, Gilligan's Island.
So now we get this straight here. You've currently, in the span of about 5 minutes, butchered 2 songs.
I did. Well, I didn't.
Are you going for a record or something?
I didn't butcher the first song. I just said
you butchered it because you used it in the wrong time. Literally, you did it at the worst possible time. I would consider that butchering it.
You know what I'm thinking, though, Wyatt? And this might be the case. If you try to speak a song instead of using the melody, it throws you. Because if you do the melody, well, sit right back and you hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship.
You're rushing.
The mate was a mighty sailor man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. The ship's aground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle with Gilligan, the skipper too, the millionaire and his wife, a movie star, the professor and Mary Ann here on Gilligan's Isle. See?
You still butchered it.
Well, no,
not as bad, but you still didn't.
The melody, but here's what you don't know. See, you weren't even alive in this.
Oh, dude! We have that show in the break room at Lowe's.
Really?
Yeah, we have this like rewind channel where it's a bunch of rewinds of classics from like the 60s and on.
Yeah.
But here's that was interesting though. That was an interesting one.
Well, here's what's really interesting, White. The first year that they had that, it went like this.
Yep, go on, butcher it a third time.
Let's see. With Gilligan, the skipper too, the millionaire and his wife, a movie star, and the rest are here on Gilligan's. And after the first season, when it was a hit, they said, hey, what about Marianne and the professor? So they had to quickly add a movie star, the professor and Marianne here on Gilligan's. They had to shove it in.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, now listen, here's the thing I was getting at. You were talking about sleeping till 2. I'm tired. I don't know if you know this or not. I'm glad. I love being back in the studio last week we had, who was on last week, Wyatt?
That is a fantastic question. The guest that we had last week was?
It was somebody really...
somebody who I guarantee you I remember off the top of my head.
They loved...
I'm not looking up at the moment at all. Nope. Nope, not even. Seriously, who was it?
Who was it?
I don't remember. It was Jason something, was it?
Jason?
Was it Jason something?
No. Well, anyways, I'll bet some of you guys...
Yeah, anyone in the audience who knows this more than we do, please explain.
Well, here's the deal. Here's all I'm getting at. We got J. Warren Wallace tonight. He's great. He's been on before. He's talking about his next book. The guy's amazing to talk to. But Wyatt, I'm really tired because it's been, I did 2 shows. I did my first... Okay, so last Friday, a week ago Friday, I flew from B&A in Nashville to Orlando. Did a show that night in Orlando. The next day, I went back to Orlando Airport, got a car, drove down southwest, did a show with Rick Green, Comedy Constitution show. The next day, I drove even further west to Tampa, dropped off the car, got in the Tampa flight to Dallas, Love. From there, I took an Uber to the Statler Hotel in downtown Dallas, Fort Worth, and spent their Sunday, and then on Monday got up and went and filmed my role in the next Dinesh D'Souza movie that will be coming out maybe August or September, right before the election, which is dealing with all of the crazy things that have happened to Trump that overall, once he decided to go and become, excuse me, the president. And so it sort of they're going to have some incredible interviews with some incredible people, including Trump. Why? You have any water by any chance?
Maybe to save this until after the show.
Yeah, I know. I got some in my throat.
Do you want to get some water?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah. I'll be right back.
I'll talk. So sorry, guys. So, anyways, so what I did was I did this. They'll interview a lot of people that have dealt with all this crazy that's happened to Trump. And then they recreate it fictionally with acting roles. So if you saw 2,000 Mules, if you saw Hillary's America, this is all stuff Dinesh does. It's that recreation. So I'm in it, and I'm one of the co-stars as a DNC chair. DNC chair. Nick Searcy's in it. If you ever seen Police State, he's in that. He was also in a movie with me back in 2004 called Welcome to Paradise. Anybody seen that? He played the pastor. So I did 2 days of filming. Then Wednesday I was off. Thursday I was off, and I'm like, man, what do I do? And I realized I've been in Dallas Fort Worth a million times in my lifetime. And you know what, guys? I had I have never been. Thanks, Wyatt.
No problem.
I have never been to Dealey Plaza. Straight gin. No, I'm kidding. I've never been to Dealey Plaza.
Wait, straight gin? I thought it was vodka.
I know. You're always messing up my spirits. But here's the thing. I was in the Stellar Hotel. I put it in my GPS, and guess what? I'm like, Dealey Plaza was less than a mile away. I walked over there and filmed myself on Instagram at Dealey Plaza where JFK was assassinated. Well, I remember the Zapruder film with him going down there and they shoot his head off.
Yeah.
I was there. I was there. And there's 2 X's in the street where he was first hit and then where the rest of his noggin was no more. And it's pretty weird. And then I was up by the grassy knoll, Wyatt.
Not the knoll.
The grassy knoll. So anyways, I went there. And then on Friday, I had to go with Rick Green and do another show that night in Dallas at a church. Then I got in the car with Rick, and we drove like 3.5 hours south to Dripping Springs, spent the day there on Saturday. Went to Fredericksburg and did a show last night in a great church there in High Point in Fredericksburg with another Comedy Constitution. I also did another Instagram post live. And then I just got back today, just in time for this and Jay Warner. But guys, here's what I wanted to talk about. I'm really tired, and it made me think of something and then Wyatt just brought it up. He said that he used to like to sleep till 2. Now, I never slept like that. I had a brother that would sleep all day. I can't do it. Wyatt, could you to this day, you're 28 years, you could, if somebody just said, do what you want, could you sleep all day?
Yes. Sleep is entertainment for me.
All right, so here's something I don't know if you know. If you live an average life, guess how many years you sleep?
Average life meaning like average?
Yeah, like 79 or whatever-ish.
79, okay.
So
let's say 78 to make it even. In that case, 16 years.
Wyatt?
Yes?
You sleep for 26 years of your life.
I do? What about the average person?
Yeah, here's the thing. With you and your extra sleepage, you're probably going to die in a couple weeks because you've used up all your days. But 26 years, and guess what? You spend 7 years trying to get to sleep.
I'm just glad they happen over the course of a lifetime, not one night.
Tossing and turning all day dang long. And guess how much time you spend eating? 4.5 years of your life are eating.
That would be horrible. Imagine the chewing. Like your jaw would be exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. But this is what I'm saying. So, I mean, what do you think life would be like if you never slept? You would have 26 more years of your life. Why? What would you do with 26 more years?
26 extra years? Think of how much sleep I could get in that time.
Good thinking. You know, it's funny. I just don't realize, I think we don't realize how much time of our life really isn't spent doing something significant. It's not. Like, for example, there's my grandson, Uriah. Come over here, Uriah. I want to show you something. This boy is, how old are you? How old are you, Uriah?
7.
He's 7 years old. And how long do you sleep? Like 10 hours a day, 5 hours? What do you think?
I'm not sure, but I do get up late.
Well, guess what? Your mom said you sleep for 7 hours.
7 hours?
7 hours. Now, when you sleep, do you dream? You ever had a dream?
Sometimes.
What's the craziest dream you ever had?
One time I had a dream where I exploded. And butts came out of my head.
Bugs came out of your head?
No, butts.
Butts? Wait, you exploded and butts came out of your head.
Yeah?
Now, folks, if you haven't had the experience of a 7-year-old dream, he's just starting his 26 years of sleeping, but he had one where he exploded and butts came out of his head. Now, listen, that's traumatic for a how old are you?
7.
That's traumatic. That's traumatic. Do me a favor. Walk over there and send your other brother over here. Goodbye, Uri. Come here, Ace. This is Asa. Asa, if you guys might remember him, because he's snuck on numerous occasions. Asa, what's the craziest dream you ever had?
My head popped out.
Wait, that's what he just said about butts coming out of his head.
And then turds come out of my head.
So he had turds come out of his head. All right, you can go back now. So I just thought you guys... I thought it was going to be poignant. Wyatt, did you...
I was expecting a philosophical,
Yeah.
deep dive into the human psyche.
Honestly, Wyatt, what I was thinking, they're little kids, it's going to be something like, they were flying, they had a pony doing
You
something.
should have known better.
But we had
They're from our family.
butts came out of Uriah's head and poop came out of Ace's head. So this is something I did not anticipate. But have you ever thought about what would you do with 26 more years of your life? I mean, think about that. There are people that you're 28 today. So you literally, it's like you just woke up 2 years ago.
And all I've done is start a mediocre podcast and sleep in.
Yes. I'll be the judge of this mediocre podcast, Wyatt. Crying out loud. Now, listen, the podcast must be doing something. We're on Salem now.
Yeah, we're definitely making it far, man. I had never expected to get this far this quickly.
Well, not with you at the helm.
No, of course not. I mean, last button I pressed was sunk the whole ship.
Well, listen, I want...
And let's not even get started on your singing. Ugh.
Has anybody... matter of fact, let's go see who's out there tonight. I haven't even looked. I wonder who came in first. Just throwing it out there. Yeah, of course, St. Nick. Oh, guess who's number 2 on mine, Wyatt?
Ashley Haas, right? Is that correct?
Ashley, do we know her?
That's a good question. Do we know Ashley Haas?
Was she the tulip salesman that was...
No, that was for Spaney. I think Ashley was the Petunia saleswoman.
That's what I just said.
Yeah, in a bitter rivalry for sales, in fact. Or for force, yeah.
Now it makes sense. For Spaney's here.
The flower business is cutthroat, man.
Hey, guess what? Carrie Tudor may not make it tonight, but wanted to make sure to tell Brad White and everyone hi. Now, that's from Ashley Haas, the Petunia salesman. Here's what's interesting. How did she get a hold of Carrie Tudor? How are they having this sort of interpersonal dialogue amongst the Brad Stine Has Issues gatherers? What kind of cult are they creating, Wyatt? And why haven't you done something to end it?
What, wait, Colt? I'm sorry. I'm too busy reading comments about mutes and stuff and worrying that I've ruined everything. Could you repeat that, please?
Okay, so here's what... Okay, this Ashley Haas, the Petunia salesman.
Yes, producer, yes.
Well, look what she says here. Happy birthday to the best producer, button pusher, drummer, Lego builder, pun master, disembodied hand, Lowe's lore collector ever. Happy birthday, Wyatt.
Oh, wait. You're saying that it's the birthday of a producer, button pusher, drummer, and Lego builder? We got to get them on the podcast,
Well, we should. Hey, the Bushquackers here. Good evening, all. Bushquackers here. Nick said happy birthday. Karen Boyd, hello, Wyatt, all you great people. Let's see. Cindy Jakovich Haas, good evening, my friends. She's assuming we're friends. We don't know that. We haven't, the jury's still out, Wyatt. Isn't that interesting? She has the same last name as the Petunia salesman. Good evening, my friends. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear White. Happy birthday to you. May God bless you today and all the year through. Dusty Wilhelm. Hello, friends. Plenty flowers. Happy birthday, White. I bet you those flowers are petunias.
Yeah, but again, man, that business is thriving nowadays.
Karin finally caught up and said happy birthday. Stan Stinson, hello, fellow warriors. Hey, Stan, how are you? Desi Wilhelms already said happy birthday. Look up Garfield cartoon Binky the Clown happy birthday video.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
Is it funny?
It's Garfield, so I think yes, but...
Folks, I got to tell you something. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Wyatt is obsessed with Garfield.
It's funny.
I have watched him watch Garfield and go through what Garfield for hours.
I think 3 of those 26 years I'd get back would just be spent with
just
Garfield.
From Garfield, yeah. Hey, T.W. Smith, happy birthday, Loin Boy. He's letting you have it. Forrest Bainey said happy birthday. Sean Sirik, hey, Brad, I got my second bees. They're canolas. Canola bees? Hopefully by the end of this year, I can send you guys some honey. No, I'll make you guys a candle too. I need your address to ship it to.
Oh, I don't know. A honey candle? That just seems sticky.
Oh my gosh! And think of the bees that would come to pollinate it, and then they catch
or
on
do
fire.
the bees get stuck to the honey to form sort of a protective sheen so you can grab it without it being sticky?
You know what the bushwhacker said?
What did he say?
He said, best decade was my teens into my 20s during the 80s. The 80s was the best decade ever. I was around in the 80s. Why did I mention that?
Can you confirm or deny the bestitude of that era?
Listen, when I was in my 80s, they had I would say, I mean...
In your 80s? So what, if you regressed in age 16 years, is that what you did with the 26 years you got back?
I don't understand what's
you
going on.
You said in your 80s, not in
the 80s that I was in.
So you've been 80 at some point, but then you suddenly regressed 16 years?
Because I didn't sleep that many years, so I got them all back.
Gosh, I forgot you're like
I reverse engineered my life, rating. Here's the thing: the '80s had the crazy hair, but I just met somebody from the '80s last night. I met somebody who was part of the '80s, and if any of you guys were in the '80s and watched MTV, he was one of the original VJs of MTV. And you know what else is interesting about him? I'm going to interview him on Brad Stine Has Issues.
When?
I don't know. Maybe tomorrow.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. He's one of the original VJs, and there's something about him that's very, very unique and very fitting for what we do. And I'm not going to tell anybody yet. Because I want you to be compelled to watch. But he did something unique that when you hear it will go, oh, really? And it will all make sense when I tell you. I'll tell you off camera why, because it's your birthday. I'll give you that as your gift. I'm not giving you cash.
Oh,
you know that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lord knows I wouldn't know what to do with money.
But the 80s was okay for me. That was when I was a professional magician, just starting out then as a comic, and started my full-time as a comedian in 1988. So towards the end of the 80s was when I started my comedy. Let's see. Cindy Jakovich Haas, getting ready to start Brad's book on our Bible study. How desperate are they, Wyatt?
I don't know, man. That's a new level.
Is
it at least the updated version?
It is, of course, I'm sure.
I would hope
you can't even find the other one. Northern Maine at Sean Siri, is Brad the skipper or Gilligan of this podcast? What would you say, Wyatt?
You're both the professor, the one that they squeeze in at the last minute.
You know what Karin said? They wore the same thing most of the time, and the rest, John Stockton. John Stockton!
Yeah, I was going to say that, but we were kind of in a groove.
He was only an NBA Hall of Famer, one of the best basketball players in history.
Okay,
I wasn't here.
Okay, look. I understand how I forgot that because I'm not a sports guy, but you?
Yeah.
You at least know about sports. What's your excuse?
Hey, look what Deanna Miller said. Thing is working for you too. You won't get that reference, Wyatt. Whose thing?
I don't know.
I knew it.
Whose thing? Is that what? What? The voice inside my left ear is screaming at me, Dr. Seuss.
What about Dr. Seuss?
That's all that's saying.
Wait a minute.
I think they are trying to make me look bad on air.
Well, no. Here's what I'm going to give you some full insight because you can't apparently reference anything. This particular person was referencing the Cat in the Hat and referencing Thing 1 and Thing 2. They cleaned up the pink ring around the bathtub.
What? No.
But that's not who we're talking about.
Wait.
Have you ever heard of the, you do reruns, right? Reruns and
I
Lowe's.
do reruns,
Have you ever heard of the Addams Family?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of this? Da 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 da. 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 You think
four movie songs. You
spooky. The Addams Family. Their house is a museum. When people come to see them, they really are a scream. The Addams Family. Do-do-do-do. Anyways, I did this because Morticia did it this way. Well, anyways, they had a very creepy house, and they had a box, and when the box opened, they had a hand that was thing.
Oh, so the thing is, I actually remember that song, but not from the Addams Family. They used it in an M&M's commercial in the late 90s, and that's somehow I still remember that, even though it was a lackluster commercial at best.
Hey, look, they said I usually see ads and it's annoying, but now it's gone. Where did they see ads?
I honestly have no idea. I don't think we monetized this, do we?
I hope not. I don't want to make any money doing this. Then I'll feel like I'm doing it for greed instead of just taking care of my people.
Oh, I thought you didn't want to make money off this to remind yourself that you don't get paid for this.
Deanna Miller says she never gets the notifications, no matter how many times she adjusts the settings. Karen Boyd said, I could sleep all day in my 20s. Of course, I worked F&B and went out after all night. What's F&B?
I was going to say, like, are you okay? Like, are you reading things right?
Of course, I worked F&B.
F&B, Friday and Bumble Day? I don't know. What does that mean? Somebody explain.
Danielle just said what a cutie your grandson is. He's so cute. He looks like you, Brad. Now, he doesn't.
No.
He doesn't.
What? No.
None of my grandsons look like me. You don't look like me. As a matter of fact, if people saw us together, they'd think you kidnapped me. And
I assure you, if they saw
none of my children
nobody
look
would
like
think
me.
I was capable of kidnapping you. I could barely kidnap a Twinkie up the stairs.
Yes. Let's see. Oh, look, St. Nick, is he Ace of Spades? Ha, ha, ha. See, I already did that one. Oh, my goodness, adorable. You're blessed with beautiful grandchildren, Brad. That's just 2. I got 2 more that didn't show up. That's right. My daughter just keeps knocking them out. You know what she's great at? Making boys. Why? Do I have a granddaughter?
No.
I don't. You know what Sean Siric said? Kids say the darndest things. And I can't argue with that. Colin said, where did all of his golden curls go? Well, what happened was he was in the pool and it flattened out. Beeswax 4 candles, send to both. Adams Family thing. White Stine doesn't know about the Adams Family. That's Bushquacker taking you down.
I know much about the Adams Family. How about this little question for you, Dad?
Yeah.
What color is the Adams Family house?
Black.
Pink.
What?
Black and white movies, in that era, they would paint things pink because it showed up better. It wasn't actually a black and white house. It was pink that just looked really nice in black and white.
Okay, where did you hear that?
The internet. You know, that infinite source of all human knowledge that like 7 people I know actually use on a regular basis.
Wyatt, you use it all the time.
Yeah, I'm one of the 7. What's the point of inventing the internet if nobody uses it to fact check things?
What is the most amazing thing you found on the internet that turned out to be true? And what was the most amazing thing you saw on the internet that turned out to be false?
Okay, so when it comes to the most interesting... Oh, you got me good. That's a good one. Most interesting thing on the internet that turned out to be true.
Yeah.
Oh, boy, howdy, that's a hard one.
How about the other one? Can you go the other direction?
Okay, yeah. The most important thing
that you're like, oh my God, and then say, oh, it's fake. Dang it.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. I would say the most impressive thing that I've ever discovered that turned out to be false.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you should say that, actually, because what is false? Is it like a binary yes or no, or is it more like a sublime message to it? Like, Is there a half truth? Is there a half lie? Or like, do those count?
False means not true.
Okay, but what if you're half true? Is that still a lie?
Give me an example of a half true.
What is half? If you think about it.
It's a false whole.
It's the hole I'm digging myself trying to think of an
So
answer.
listen, I caught you off guard. Clearly,
you caught me off. I need like a research team and weeks of time to figure out that answer.
You need a research team to help you think in your head about your own personal lived experience.
The thing is, you don't like Dead Space, and that's how I think. I can't talk and think at the same time. My brain doesn't work that way. Okay, gosh. Okay,
Okay, well,
no, I got this. There was something I heard about at Lowe's.
What?
Lowe's Lore Time.
Okay.
Okay, so I found out that we have an official Lowe's Facebook page. It is called Disgruntled Lowe's Employees. So right off the bat,
in other words, all of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to know what that group has claimed is the most common password for like all login credentials at Lowe's?
Incompetence?
No.
Sawdust?
No. Mm-mm. Are you ready for this?
We've reached a new?
That's a good one, but no.
Okay.
The most common password Lowe's associates use throughout the entire company.
Okay, is I want out?
I hate Lowe's.
Oh my god.
I'm not kidding. That is the most impressive thing that has been true, in my opinion. Because it confirms what I've already known. Lowe's is no longer a hardware store. It's a sinking ship.
You keep saying that way, and it's probably obviously multi-million, but maybe $1 billion. I mean, how many stores do they have?
1,708, I believe.
Yeah, and they can't survive with 1,708 stores and be losing money in all of them. Maybe it's just yours. Maybe it's your employees. Maybe it's your
problem. It is our store. But 3 years ago, we were one of the best performing in the company.
Maybe because you keep letting people steal stuff.
I don't let people steal stuff. People ask for product without paying, and I say, I guess okay. I don't let them steal.
What is the policy if you saw somebody stealing something?
The policy is pretend it never happened. Do not try to stop them. Don't even look in their direction. Just let them do their thing, and then file a report, and they'll get back to you in 8 to 12 months if they do.
File a report. Hey, I saw somebody steal something.
That's what they have to do. You file a report.
And they never prosecute.
Well, here's the thing. What they do is they let it simmer. They want to build this up. Like they want them to keep stealing, basically, and then keep getting reported until it builds up into like a federal case. So that they can actually like do some damage.
So like the same guy does it 10 times, they can finally pull the triggers. Like,
yes.
Look at this.
Yes.
This guy's done like this multiple infractions.
Yes.
I mean, he took a nail, then he took a nut, then he took a bolt, then he took a piece of string, he took some yarn.
Honestly, it is kind of ironic that Lowe's has a perpetual problem with fences. Do you not know what a fence is?
Yeah. A fence is who you sell your product to for them to go.
A fence is also a very common thing that is sold at Lowe's.
What's the most popular fence at Lowe's?
Chain link.
People buy the crap out of chain link fences there? They just get them from you? Do they come in rolls?
Oh, yeah. Well, some of them are in rolls, but like the gate doors are actually a solid piece.
Okay. Are they expensive?
I mean, depending on what size you get, how much you get.
Not for most people. Apparently, they can just walk off without them.
Yeah, basically. In fact, I don't think there's a single thing in the store that hasn't been sold.
I don't understand why
people literally steal the car, like the vehicles that are parked up front.
What vehicles? The rentals?
Well, yeah, rentals, but also lawnmowers and stuff like that.
What is the world coming to? Why do people have no integrity?
It's coming to your local Lowe's with intent to steal.
Integrity is gone. People, what kind of a human being, seriously, reaches a place where they just don't care about having morality, having some sense of integrity, being good, being earning a living, earning your income? What I don't understand.
You see,
but I feel like you guys facilitate it by not making it cost them. Listen, if I can steal, nobody stops me. I'm going to keep stealing.
Well, don't. Hey. But if you keep doing it, we will respond by putting more things under lock and key, so the average Joe has to wait longer. You see, that's progress.
Yeah, perfect. It's progressives. They ruin, destroy, taint, and crush everything they touch. They live in this world. It's a cult. It is a religious cult. They live in a world where if I'm nice to thieves, somehow I've done something good. Forget the fact that people that built this thing and put money into it are losing money. Forget the fact that these people have no integrity and you are basically stealing their dignity by allowing them to steal. You feel good about yourself. You've done nothing to help this person. You do nothing to hold people accountable to anything because you don't believe in morality, but you certainly don't want anybody that crosses the border that you think is a wonderful thing to live in your house. You hypocrite. I struggle with this cancerous ideology, Wyatt, and it is in fact a religious cult. You need to understand that progressivism left is a anarchy of destruction, deconstruct everything, deconstruct capitalism. Everybody gets the same thing. Of course, it's never happened in history, never will. They live in an illusion, and it's broken, and it's corrupt, and it kills everybody's spirit and hope and dignity, and they don't. It's demonic. There's no other way to describe it because it never works ever. It destroys everything. And they never stop and go, maybe we need to adjust and not do that. It doesn't work. Never. They just facilitate people living like criminals. Anyways, I was just in Texas, Fredericksburg, and we had an amazing show with Rick Green, Comedy Constitution show. It was amazing, and it was full house, great pastor, great group. We're hoping to tour it more, get out into your city, because not only do I do my comedy stuff, but then you also get him talking about the Constitution, about our heritage, Christian America. Folks, you really need to understand that we are going to fight. We're going to try. We're going to pray. We're going to believe that God will intervene. We don't know if he will. You know, listen, sometimes he judges you. Sometimes there's a Job thing going on. Sometimes there's a worship of the golden calf, and suddenly your chosen people have to suffer. Sometimes God, like Lowe's, allows you to keep stealing until finally he said, okay, you've reached your limit. I'm dropping the hammer. And America has exported such evil in the last number of years. I don't know how we're not judged. We can repent and we can say, please, God, save us. But repent also means turn from your wickedness and start living like a holy person. Start living like a disciplined person. Start living the way God in Christ would have asked of us. Jesus Christ has done things that nobody else has ever done. He said things nobody else has ever said. He's the most moral human being that's ever been recorded in history. Every other religious person that came after him references Jesus. They want to be props and connected to Jesus. He doesn't reference them. Matter of fact, that's part of what J. Warner Wallace talked about in Person of Interest, was how everybody references Jesus. He's the gold standard because he's God. He really did it. He really was it. It's really how it works. It's the truth. There is no other where to go. He was documented. He really existed, really died, really came to life. Everybody died when they were told to recant. No, I saw him come to life. I've seen the impossible. This is the answer. The Bible is the revelation of reality, folks. This is why I want you to have fun on Brett Sunday's issues, but I want you to learn and be inspired. And that's why we're going to talk to J. Warner Wallace in his new book. It's called The Truth in True Crime. This guy is was a Los Angeles homicide detective, just like you. He was on many of the NBC Nightlines or whatever you call it, or late night Datelines. He did cold cases. He found 20, 30-year-old cold cases of murder, found the guy, did it all. Amazingly enough, most of these guys were walking an aisle at Lowe's. That's where he found him. They were stealing a chain link fence. It was just ironic. But his books are fascinating. It teaches you. You have to learn what you believe and bring it to the marketplace of ideas. You have to live it boldly. You have to not apologize for what is true. If Jesus is who he said he was, if this is true, you have to talk about it every day of your life. There's no other way to think about it. It's the most important story there ever was, and you're obligated, he said, go forth and tell everybody who I am. This is what I'm trying to do, train you to be like this. Have you joined the Mighty 10,000? $3 a month. Go to bradson.com. Just put in your militia of the mind. That gives me your email. But join us. Be part of this. We're going to continue to grow. I met a guy that I said last night that he said, hey, I want to join the Special Forces. I hope he does. We'll find out. But this is what we need. We need you to share these things. We need you guys to keep coming on. I'd love to see you guys show up every Monday. You're our fans. You are family. You're our friends. You are supporters. You have been part of this thing. You got us not only a place to work that isn't freezing to death with a freaking Russian hat. You got us a camera with another one and another mic so we could have a guest. And then you got us on Salem Radio. This is ridiculous. And you all get a profit's reward for that, you know? You invested in it. Folks, I want you to, you're going to love this interview. We got some amazing guests coming up down the road. Trust me, you know me. I'm always trying to find you some unique people you're going to love. Some very special people that will inspire you, will help you grow and educate you in your faith, in this truth that is God has revealed himself as in Christ. But Jay Warner we're getting to a place where, as you see, we're doubling up. We're bringing people back on that people really enjoyed and that really influenced us. And so I brought him on. You're going to love the interview. You're going to love his new book. You're going to love these questions. Why do you have anything to say before we head over to Jay Warner, since it is your birthday?
My birthday or my unbirthday? This is your last chance to get this right.
It's your birthday.
Thank you. And now, what song do we sing on the birthday?
Happy birthday.
Okay, I was really hoping you wouldn't do that. Yeah, it's good.
Happy birthday.
You know, this is awkward online on the air as it would be if this was done in real life.
Dear
Why did I coax in doing this? Oh, great.
Happy birthday to you.
Are you done yet?
You.
So,
happy birthday, son. I love you.
So 28 years on this planet, and the only gift you could give me is a fifth song you've butchered.
A lot cheaper than giving you cash. Welcome to J. Warner Wallace. Enjoy. How do you do, my friend?
Oh, so glad to be with you. You know, I think when we first met too, yeah, we do have a lot of interesting kind of friends, mutual friends. And so I'm not actually wearing an ankle bracelet, but I'm willing to come back on your show. So maybe it's just a sign of utter desperation on my part. I don't
usually,
know.
Or a blow to the head. If you've had a skiing accident or later.
Yeah,
I've had all types of reasons why people stumble into this thing going, why did I choose this again? I don't know. But, you know, here's the thing about it. I loved your book, and I've always loved apologetics. I've always loved theology. I've always loved philosophy. And by the way, to hear somebody say they loved philosophy, they're like, what's wrong with you? It just interests me. And I think it's because as a comic, frankly, our livelihood has two things that are very crucial. One, we love words. We know the importance of words and using them as tools, as weapons, as means of communication. Of course, as a Christ follower, Jesus is the Word. The Logos created everything. So it's got a lot of significance to it than just a means to communicate. But I also think that part of what make comedians what they are is we have this deep, deep interest in the human condition. Why do humans do the things they do? Why do they say the things they do? Why do they act the way they do? As a Christian, I have a little spiritual insight to that. But as a human, and a flawed human at that, we have to find other ways to examine the human condition, not to abandon our faith or the religious element, because it's the foundation for why we exist. It's the teleology for existence. But meanwhile, we have a real life to live in the three-dimensional realm. And so we have to deal with that. And so as much as we're going to jump into your brand new book, The Truth in True Crime, and you're always very articulate and interesting in the way that you frame your former livelihood in your apologetics. But, I want to try maybe a different tact first, and maybe it's not. Maybe this has happened to you before. But I think that one of the things that I'm curious about is just that profession itself. I don't know that anybody's ever dug down a little bit about the dynamics to being a detective in murder cases, because it's not for everybody. And I'm curious just about what makes somebody tick that jumps into that world. I don't even know how my father-in-law was a police officer in Redondo Beach, retired 30 years, I think. But he was just beat cop. Actually, at the end, he just served warrants and things like that. I mean, that was his life. But let's start with this. I'm just curious. I want to give people a little bit of background at who you are as a man and your livelihood that brought you to this place. So how does it even work? If somebody becomes a police officer, is it kind of a normal gig? You get in a car, you drive around, and then you decide, now I want to be a detective. And then do you have to apply for that? And then they say, well, you got to earn that. Or does somebody one day come up to you like a black belt and say, you are now a detective? So tell me how that whole game even works. How do you get into this whole thing?
Well, it is kind of organic. And everyone who's a detective is first and foremost a police officer. So you get hired and you're going to be in patrol. That's going to be your first, who knows how many years. It could be depending on the agency and how old you are. If you're 21, you might be in patrol for 10 years. But at some point, you're going to get a chance to do something that has an investigative background. So for me, I was working patrol, and we had a detail called our Metro detail. And this Metro detail was like a street narcotics detail. And it would use police officers that maybe didn't have to have any experience investigating anything. That was kind of like an entry point kind of a detail. And you could, if they selected you, you would do a 6-month rotation in Metro. So I did that twice as a patrol officer. And that exposed me to some supervision that could see if I could, can I write a search warrant? That, can I follow up on a case? Can I do interviews? Can I write reports? Can I file a case with the DA? But you only have 6 months to make make a name for yourself. So I did that twice. And then I was selected for the gang detail, and I spent 2 years working gangs, and that detail is an investigative assignment. So now I'm working as a detective, kind of earned my time as a detective. So I finally rose to senior investigator in that detail. And then I started working undercover, and I was in that detail for about 4 years. And that's when I actually became a Christian, as I was in that investigative detail. And that's a detail that works all kinds of cases. We are assigned to detectives, but we're the undercover team. So I worked robberies, residential burglaries, murders, whatever it was the detectives needed from us, whether they needed a set of eyes to watch somebody, we got involved. And if we ended up culminating a case, then we would take it over. So it would become our case. It's their case until we get so involved that it has to become our case, and then we'll file it from there. So that taught me at least enough about how to investigate cases, how to file cases, that then when an opening came up in robbery homicide with a sergeant who I knew, who had seen my work, said, hey, you should take Wallace in robbery homicide. And usually that to me was quite an honor, because that's in our division. It's funny you said your grandfather was a beat cop in Redondo Beach. So I worked right next door in Torrance. So here we are, it's only just a borderline between Redondo and Torrance.
Yeah.
So at some point that sergeant got me in that detail, and then I was off and running. And along the way, what I was starting to tinker with, and this kind of became what I was known for, were unsolved cases. And the only reason why I don't think I would ever have really even been interested in unsolved murders except that my dad had a case from 1972 that remained open. And it always bothered him because it was a horrific case. And it was just one of those cases that you were never going to solve, sadly, because it was a complete stranger who killed a little girl, and no one ever had this guy's name on any, and we just didn't know who he was until Ancestry DNA came online around 2017, and then we were able to solve it with Ancestry. We never would have solved it unless the Ancestry DNA had come online. But I started tinkering with that really early, even before I was a Christian, and I wanted it to work. And I thought, I got really interested in something called forensic statement analysis. Now, that's just where you're looking at words and word use, and you're asking yourself, do I have deception indicators? Like what's the use of pronouns? What are the letters and word? I mean, the words that aren't necessary, usually adjectives and adverbs. Like, why are you using those adjectives? Why are you using those adverbs? Just trying to dig down deep. And so I started using that skill set, looking at cold cases, one in particular, and I ended up working that case through 4 different details. I looked at that case. I worked that case while I was in the back room. I worked it when I was assigned for a short period of time to intelligence. I worked at Wallace in intelligence, and just chipping at it, because these are cases that, no one cared. Sadly, when a case goes cold like that, 2 generations of detectives earlier, like, it's forgotten. Those people, the detectives who worked the case, a couple of them were dead. All of them were retired. It's like it's kind of falls off the map. And your agency even, it's like, it'd be nice if somebody would have worked this, but we understand you have fresh cases. So if you don't get to it, we're not going to hold it to you. So around the 2000s, we started assigning those cases that I had been tinkering with. And that's when we started to work them seriously. And I ended up with the career working cold cases exclusively. And so I worked them collaterally for a lot of years, and then I worked them exclusively. And that's where I ended up making a name for myself in my agency. And it was Dateline, really, that feature so many of my cases that kind of allowed me the opportunity to write a book. I
But
think if it hadn't been,
are you unique in your accomplishments, in your success rate, or you just happen to be highlighted, but anybody that kind of does what you do have the same track record of success?
well, I think if anyone who have come in, well, like I think you're right. I think it's just my situation was such that, number one, I happened to have an agency that was willing to resource this, because it would cost the agency around $500,000 a year to keep a team open. And that really, what are they getting out of it? Well, they were getting exposure on NBC Universal on Dateline. Now, I think that part of the reason why we were getting that exposure is we're not that far down the street from NBC Universal. And I always say that. It's not like I was that great. It's just I happen to be close. So they could just drive down and be in the courtroom, bring all their crew down to be in the courtroom. So I just felt like I was in the right place at the right time. But you do learn some things. And I always wanted, honestly, Brad, I always wanted to write this book, because although I was looking at the evidence and investigating the Gospels kind of forensically to become a Christian, well, then, I wasn't doing that every day then. I mean, once I determined it was true,
Yeah.
I set that down. Once I determined it was true, I didn't feel like I needed to revisit the evidence every week.
Yeah.
But then what you find yourself doing is you find yourself saying, okay, how do you live this? And even before I became a Christian, I was seeing certain repeated behaviors in the people I was taking to jail or the victim groups. Like if you live a certain way, it leads to a certain trajectory. And you see this if you're a police officer and if you work investigating cases, over and over and over again. And you think, wow, there's some cautionary tales. And if you work this, so for example, you'll know that if you're the son or a daughter of a police officer, I'll bet your dad, if that was your dad's dad who was a cop, I'll bet you that he got some advice from his dad that was unique, because you don't want your kids doing this, you don't want your kids doing that, because you've seen where this leads in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And now you're hyper vigilant with your own kids. So most of the time, the phone calls, like I know you're going to be interviewing soon Frank Turek, a great friend of mine. And typically what happens is when someone calls me like a Frank Turek, Frank's not calling me to let's go over and let's brush up on the cosmological argument. Let's brush up on the, he's not doing that. He's calling me probably to say, what do you make of this guy? And so he's asking me really not from my expertise as a Christian presenter, a Christian case maker. He's asking me, what's your gut sense as a detective tell you about this? So I've always wanted to write a book that would be like rules for life Not that you learn from psychology, not like a Jordan Peterson kind of 12 rules for life, but like what have you learned working criminal cases that would be good advice to give myself, to give my kids, to just to kind of flourish? And so this is 15 crime stories, but there are 15 attributes of human flourishing that are all confirmed by studies. Now you will dumb into these by just working criminal cases, but if you were studying the sociological studies and the research, you'd also dumb into these. But if you knew your Bible, you would have already known these, because it turns out that these are ancient principles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is why I think you and I both know that the culture has wandered dramatically away from its Judeo-Christian roots. And when it does so and tries to convince us that really there's no advantage living the principles of the Bible, there's no advantage to this. One way of living is as good as another. Well, we do that at our own peril. And we do that really in opposition to what we know from secular research. Because the research, that's why I provided so many endnotes in this book, because I want people to see that, I'm looking at the same studies that secularists are looking at in these 15 areas of flourishing. But like, duh, these are ancient. Now I'll just say as a former skeptic, this is a book that does, I think, build a case for the truth of Christianity, right? Because if the Bible is true, it ought to describe us the way we really are. And it does. So I think that's a way of checking a box and saying, well, if it's true, it ought to be accurate, and it is accurate about us. Therefore, it should, at least, is one thing in its favor. I remember listening to Ben Shapiro one time talk about why he believed Judaism was true. And one of the reasons why he thought it was true was because it works so well. Like its principles actually lead to something that he thinks is valuable. So he sees that as an evidence that it's actually true.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know that's always the case, to be honest, because I've got 6 brothers and sisters, half brothers and half sisters, that were raised LDS. And I'll bet you they would tell me that their Mormon faith system is working for them. So I think there's more to it than just, am I flourishing under the system? But I do think if it is true, it ought to represent us well, but it ought to at least describe us well. And that's what I hope this book does. I hope it provides you with rules for life, but it also provides you with evidence that Christianity is true.
Yeah, and that's crucial, because just like me as a comic, God uses a lot of flavors to tell the same story, because the story kind of stays the same. I was just listening to somebody speaking today about life isn't that complicated. It's either there's God and you believe in him, or there's paganism. This is the same story told throughout history. Nothing is different. Nothing is different. And we are returning to paganism. That's how bad it's become. And because once you take away Christianity and the Judeo-Christian foundation, something fills the void. And it's always a counterfeit. It's always something else to worship that the enemy will try to use to.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brad. Let me tell you that I think that you hit it. We are worshipers. And one of the chapters in this book is a story about a guy named Santa Claus in our community, who was a homeless guy who was canning. He was collecting recyclables out of trash cans. And about 2 o'clock each day, he'd have enough to afford one meal. It was a McDonald's meal. And then he could go buy alcohol and he could drink the rest of the day. And that was just his personal pattern. And he had been doing that for years. And he was killed one night. And I thought it was a puzzling one. I got the case as a fresh homicide. So I wasn't a cold case. I just, a lot of times when you're working cold cases back in those days, they're just like the extra things you're doing, right? You still have to work your fresh homicides. So I got assigned this case. So I get to the crime scene and the dude's still there on the ground. He's been dead for a little while. He was found in front of a liquor store. He was sleeping in a porta potty at a local construction site and had been sleeping there for who knows how long. Whoever killed him knew he was sleeping there, so he just went over there and rocked the porta potty. Santa Claus comes out, old guy who looks like Santa Claus. That's not his real name, of course, and he gets stabbed. And he stumbles over to the liquor store and he dies maybe 15 feet in front of the liquor store. When I get there, I'm thinking, I know why people do murders. There's only 3 reasons why anyone does a murder. It's sex, money, and power. That's it. There's no 4th reason. These are all driven by pride. But pride, it kind of expresses itself in this way. And I was thinking, afterwards, after becoming a Christian, I was thinking, isn't it interesting that it really is a matter of misplaced worship? So what happens is, rather than worship God, like you said, we end up worshiping a counterfeit. We're going to fill a void. And we are all idol makers, all of us at our very core.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we worship something that God has created for us, for our good and for his glory, sex, money, and power. But because we've turned it into an idol, we've overemphasized it, we've twisted it. We make it our God. It becomes our master. And we start to respond violently if you even challenge the slightest thing about our idol. You don't challenge our idols. And those are the three things that we begin to worship and idolize. And what happened in this case was another local canner confronted Santa Claus because Santa Claus had collecting cans out of an alley that this other guy thought was an area that he really should be canning. He had been canning out of that alley for a long time, and he kind of felt like Santa Claus had drifted over into his region. And so he now look, how much, I thought to myself, so how much money are you really getting out of these cans? Probably a couple bucks, but maybe $1.50 a day, who knows? But whatever it was enough because this had become this guy's idol. And again, you might think, well, if you're going to kill someone for $1.50, well, if it's your idol, you will. Yeah. Because you've now turned it into overly important priority in your life. So he confronts Santa Claus at the recycling center, and his guy's name was George Santos. He kind of blew him off. This Santa Claus' real name was George Santos, and so he kind of blew him off. Didn't say anything harsh to this guy. This guy's name was Petey Caldwell, and he did nothing. He just kind of like, like a fly is bothering me, just shoe fly kind of a thing. And that actually he felt was disrespectful in front of all the other people that these guys mutually knew, their community. He had been disrespectful to him. So now you had triggered two things. You've scratched that money issue, only $1.50, whatever it was, but it was enough because it had become an idol, and authority. In fact, that's in the power category. Now you've bruised that. So that night he went over and he stabbed him to death. Now, it turns out that all the crimes I work, if you think about it, are really just a matter of misplaced worship. All of these crimes are driven by idolatry of one nature or another. We don't call it that, though. We just say, what's the motive? Well, why is it a motive? Because we no longer have gone all the way. If we're here and God is here, we don't focus our worship all the way to God. It stops short of God at the things that God has created. I think because we can see that stuff. It's tangible, and sometimes God seems hidden. And so we will focus. And if you don't know God, you're going to focus on God's creation. That's the only thing you do know. Yeah. If you're a naturalist, materialist, you're focused on the natural material world. And so what we see is that when so here's the question, and this is why every chapter in this book has a section called Chase the Lead, where I'm trying to say, okay, well, so what are your idols? What are I have them, dude. I have them. I know look, there's 15 rules for life in this book that I suck at. Okay. I don't do any of these well. I know that. I still aim at them. And I think these are important concepts to grasp and to master, or try to master, but you never will, because we're just too fallen and messed up to really ever get good at any of these. But here's what I think we've done in the culture is we've stopped aiming at anything. We've kind of said that, no, that these things don't really matter. And you know what I always said, you said something earlier to me that I thought it made me think that, as a police officer, and my son, there were 3 generations. My dad was a Jim Wallace at Torrance PD. I was a Jim Wallace at Torrance PD. My son is Jim Wallace at Torrance PD. And as I've watched this for 62 years, I often will see things where there's seasons where everyone wants to defund the police. They never said it that way before, but they would typically mean it, but they would say it in some other way. And I've always been the kind of person who said that, no problem, do it, defund them, because I know how the pendulum swings, and I know where this ultimately is going to lead. Because if law enforcement is what I think it is, you're going to need some form of it. If people are who I think they are, you're going to need law enforcement at some. So there's a part of me, Brad, that says, if we want to move away from these 15 attributes of human flourishing, if we want to teach our kids that they don't matter, knock yourself out. The pendulum will swing back, though, because it turns out these are truly not based on culture. They're not based in some point in history. They're based on biology. This is who we are genetically, who we are biologically, and you're not going to change that. That's why when you say, these are ancient things, like nothing changes. Well, it's because it's not based on culture. It's not based on context or situation. There's something driving us that's from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that's what I'm trying to capture in the book.
Well, and that's amazing. Another way to look at the human condition, because the message of Jesus never changes, but the messenger does. Obviously, he uses, seasons change, cultures change, history changes, technology changes. So it just is in a different format, but it's the same story. I mean, the original murderer was one man jealous and angry that his desire to worship God and give him his sacrifice on his terms was rejected. And instead of internally going, maybe I need to adapt and perhaps humble myself and be more able to follow what God has asked of me. I'm just going to eliminate the guy who won. And it's jealousy, it's power,
Right.
but I mean, I want to get deeper into some of these stories and or subject topics, if that's the way you want to do
Yeah,
it.
go.
But before I do that, there's just a couple other elements of your former profession I want to examine a little bit for two reasons. One, because it's interesting. Not everybody understands this world you're into. We've seen a lot of television series about, murder detectives and so forth and so on. But somebody who really did it, I'm curious about something that I think sometimes people gloss over. You and I are close to the same age. When we used to watch Westerns or whatever, and they'd shoot a guy,
Yeah.
there was no blood, there was no hole, there was no brain matter.
Yeah.
It was clean. Like the guy just
Yeah.
fell over, and it was almost like, yeah, well, he deserved it. He was the bad guy, but he's dead
right.
now, and so now life can go on and our merry way. And people forget somebody had to bury him, and somebody had to dispose of, and we made it almost simplistic, and even took away some of the, I'm guessing, the horror. I don't even know if that's the word. But here's what I was curious about, Jim. How does one prepare themselves psychologically to see the things you had to see? Because I don't even know what they are. I don't know the amount of cases that you were involved with, but the fresh ones that you get asked to cross the yellow tape that the rest of us don't get permission to do. It isn't a beautiful Hollywood aesthetic that is pleasing to the eye and artistic. You see you literally see the worst case scenario of human hatred or human evil towards other humans. And I can't even imagine coming upon a child, baby, some old lady who's clearly vulnerable and unable to in any way defend herself. I don't know. So I'm curious. I know this is a bit off topic from what we're talking about, and I promise the book will be the main thrust of this.
Well, no. I think that actually this is something I tried to cover in the book, because I know that I get asked this question once in a while. I do cover this in the book, in the section on friendships. Kind of worry sometimes. Am I just too calloused? Like, shouldn't this be bothering me more? There's probably a lot of cops who have asked that question doing this work. And I think it's generational. So for example, if you were my dad's generation, how you might have responded to seeing this stuff over and over again might be different than what my son's going through. I don't know for sure. I think part of it for me was that I was in a family in which to be the next Jim Wallace, you're going to need to be able to do this. And I remember feeling that way as a very young teenager. My dad brought me to the station to look at a black and white, probably 8mm, whatever it was, reel. It was on a reel, and another one was all projectors. And it was of a crime scene, a serial, it was a murder of, I think, 3 or 4 people at the same location. It was pretty famous in our city at the time. And it was one of my dad's cases. And it was the film they took the day they discovered the bodies. And what happened was these bodies were in a room where they had all their throats were cut. So they bled out pretty completely, to the point where there was a slight threshold in the room. And when they opened the door, it broke. The blood was so thick that it broke the skin of it. It had been overnight. And it set like a title of, you could see the blood moving across the room. So he had this, and the bodies were all there. And I expressed an interest in this case. So my dad showed me the black and white film. And I remember I only got maybe 2 minutes into it. And I said, okay, enough. And I thought at the time, I probably could never do this job, because it was just too hard to do the job. And I'm like, look at my dad showing his, like, really, why would you even expose your kid to that? But I ended up doing the job. And so I think that part of it might just be that if I wanted to meet my own expectations of what it was to be a Jim Wallace. And the only example I had in my life was my dad. He was the only Jim Wallace I knew. If I was going to be like that Jim Wallace, I was going to have to be somebody who could do this and not shudder. So that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, and I talk about this in this chapter, is that I've always tried to, and this is not good, but I do it. I've always drawn a really tight circle around the people for whom I'm willing to cry. And there are not a lot of people in my circle. So I always say that I've always said this, that my kids are in that circle. My wife's in that circle. My dog's in that circle. My cat is not in that circle.
Well, I can't blame you for that. The cat doesn't deserve,
exactly.
Shouldn't even be your home, let alone your circle.
That's right. But here's what it means. It means that if my nephew was murdered, I could work that case. Now, I know that sounds terrible, but if you can't draw a really tight circle you'll be a mess. And the reason why you'll be a mess is because you'll eventually have a case. And I've had cases of shaken babies. So I've had cases of a 6-year-old murdered by his dad. You know, these are cases where if you're going to analogize this and you're going to think, well, I've got a 6-year-old, this looks like my own son. Okay, you're not going to be able to work it. Somebody's got to work it.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't all of us bow out.
Yeah.
Somebody has to actually work these cases. Now, here's what the challenge is for those of us who are Christ followers.
Yeah.
Jesus is calling us to open that circle up so wide that even our enemies are in it, closed it down so tightly that even my family members aren't in it. So clearly, this is the exact opposite. And this is, I think, the challenge for anyone who's doing this work as a believer. Is how do we, and this is why I spent so many chapters in this book talking about different aspects of suffering and trauma, because I think that's the one common thing that all humans experience. And so we don't have anything else in common sometimes, but we do have that. We're going to suffer at some point, and how we respond to suffering, it matters. So I don't know that I do that well, Brad. I just know that
I don't think you're supposed to.
Yeah, but I know
don't think you're supposed to suffer. Well, I mean, maybe there is some sort of Christian elegance. What we see suffering means, for example, in China, if you're arrested as a Christian or you go to prison, it's very common for these folks. That actually goes with getting saved. Oh, and then you'll probably go to prison. Okay. I mean, you're talking about being all in.
Yeah.
You go to a totalitarian regime and you're a Christian, it's legit. You are probably a believer. This ain't bow your head, close your eyes, nobody's looking, nobody's going to make you embarrassed. This is eyes wide open. You know exactly what you're in for, and that's okay. That's what it means to be a Christ follower. And unfortunately, in America, we haven't been, there was nothing at stake for us. And so I think it made a very shallow, very cowardly batch of Christians. And we're paying the price for that as we speak, with a lot of denominations going pure heretical because they didn't stand for the truths of the theological history of God's rules for how the game works and what he expects of us. But they would say, the Chinese Christians would say, when they go through that, thank you for allowing me to share in your suffering.
Yeah, right.
Now,
because the biblical authors would say that. That's what gets me. Yeah, and I think we read that sometimes as Christians in America, and we're like, well, that's just what it was in the first century for them. But I forget who it was, and I've been citing this quote for a while now, and I need to source it. And I Googled it trying to find it, but someone said once that he believed, well, he knew that the church started in houses under persecution, and the church will end in houses under persecution. And I think we're in this period of history, at least in this location in North America, where that's not the case. We can't even imagine that it would ever. I think we're starting to imagine now that it might be the case. Yeah. But I think that is, that aspect of commitment. Well, here's what I'm reading right now, because every summer, Susie and I spend 6 weeks with Billy Graham Association doing marriage resiliency as chaplains for police officers who have been involved in critical incidents. Many of them are really badly injured, and their careers are coming to an end, or they're struggling with what they've seen, like you said, and they're trying to figure out, and then their marriages are struggling. So they're trying to figure out, how do we go forward? So we've been doing this work for about 5 years. And when we go, this year, I'm reading through Job again. I've been in Job before, but I'm really going through it line by line. And one of the things, the takeaways as I'm reading through Job, is I'm like, wow, I think we think that suffering is evil, and that God is not the author of evil. So therefore, God would never author suffering. He would never even, it wouldn't be his choice. He might allow it, like he allowed it in Job, but he would never be the author of suffering. And I think that that's a misread of what suffering is. Is suffering always evil? Or is it that the truth really, that suffering is the mechanism really by which most good things in our character are developed?
Yeah.
In other words,
that's absolutely true.
Right.
The older you get in your faith, you grow from pain, not pleasure.
Not pleasure.
The pleasure is a rest, is a respite from the journey, from the challenges. But all of us know, if we've lived this life authentically, is our growth came through trials, through difficulties, through pain. It's the only way he can get our attention sometimes. I think it's what C.S. Lewis said is God's megaphone to the world. Yes, I think that some of the challenges that I've gone through, I realized I wouldn't have changed my character idiosyncrasies that were not conformed to Christ without pressure, without a conflict, without irritation, because I wouldn't have done it willingly. I don't want to do this. I want
Yeah,
to
you know what?
rest.
This is why when I did this, I think probably one of the more controversial chapters in this book is the chapter on marriage. But when I was thinking about what marriage has become to a generation right now, where they see it as kind of this thing that is, it's like an Instagram moment in which we are trying to find our utmost fulfillment of joy in our marriage. Look, if instead marriage is the opportunity for you to be so close to someone that you've allowed them permission to shape and refine you to become the holy person you're supposed to be. And you also have permission to shape and refine them, because the commitment is with God is so deep that even if I say the truth that is painful at the moment, you're not leaving me, because our commitment to each other is that deep. And if you say the truth to me, like, in other words, it turns out that every moment in which I've become a better person is probably Susie speaking truth to me.
Yeah.
It's probably her saying, do you see this? And I don't want to hear it. And almost always in the initial moments of it, I'm probably going to push back. But she's right. And this is the purpose of marriage, is that she's trying to present me as a better person to a holy God at the end of this whole thing.
Well, it's easy to run, and our instinct is to run from pain. If something hurts, we leave, we walk away. I get rid of that friend. I walk away from that job. I don't want that. But if you are taking the sacred oath of marriage seriously, and one thing I did say to my wife, divorce is not an option. My parents were divorced, her parents were divorced. I said, I'm going to break this chain right now.
I felt the same way
for my kids. And it is so difficult to be married. So now, maybe some people have a little easier times than others. Who knows? I know whatever pain you're going through, it feels as bad as it can get. But I do know this. One thing we all have in common is we get into these fights now and again, or we start getting into these conflicts where you are sure that they're wrong. You're guaranteed it ain't me, it's you. And by the way, it might be, but what we end up finding out is it's always there designed to teach you how to humble yourself, and you do your healing from what is necessary for what God is doing through them to you. And we don't want it that way. No. It's my turn to fix them. My turn to let them do their work. And suddenly you got to realize God's saying, that's not your business. They do have an obligation. Women do have an obligation to a submissive role in certain areas. That's true. I have an obligation to love my wife as Christ loved the church.
Which is the ultimate act of submission. Yeah,
I don't want that role. I don't even want that role. That's too much. Wait a minute. That ain't right. How come I have to do that? That isn't fair. She doesn't deserve that. And he goes, yeah, welcome to the club. This is how it works.
One of the tips I have in this book is a tip I learned years ago when I became a Christian that changed the game entirely for me in my marriage, completely changed it. And I teach it to the couples, and it's basically this idea that we've been told, and sometimes you'll hear it in marriage counseling where, it's not a 50-50 relationship, it's 100-100. No, it's not really. The effective marriages that are transformational are what I call 100-0 relationships. So here's what it means. It means that I don't have any expectations. Look, my response to Susie, whatever I say to Susie, that's between me and God. My relationship first is a covenant with God, and I've promised God I'm going to treat her a certain way. And whether I do or don't is between me and God. Now, whether she responds the way that I would like her to, or the way she even ought to, that's not between me and her. That's between her and God.
Yeah.
So what I do is I give her 100% as much as I can with zero expectation. And by the way, your satisfaction in anything is always based on what your expectations were. If I think this is going to be a 5-star restaurant and I go and it's really good, it's a 4-star, but it's not what they said it was a 5-star.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm upset about a really good restaurant.
Yeah.
So the point is your expectations determine your level of satisfaction. So here's what I decided to do. I said, every argument I'm having with Susie is no longer between Susie and I. Every conversation I have is no longer between Susie and I. Every conversation, every argument is between me and Jesus. And at the end of it, I don't want anything I have to apologize to Jesus for. So in other words, what's going to come out of my mouth is between me and God. And I'm just not going to, and if she's going to make a claim about me, which is probably true 99% of the time, I'm not going to, it's just between me and Jesus. How would I respond to Jesus if he was standing right here in front of me? I wouldn't have said this. I'm going to say it a different way. And so what happened was that began to shape my thinking on every interaction. Now, I would say probably 2 or 3 months into this, Susie is like going, this is a different version of Jim that I've seen. And remember, we didn't become Christians for 18 years together. So we were together for 18 years. Then we became Christians, and probably another 2 or 3 before I realized this principle was what was governing my conversations. So now so she'd seen this old version of Jim for 20 years. And now she's seeing this version. And I remember she tells people that when she realized this was happening, and I never expressed it to her, I never said, this is what I'm going to do from now on. I just knew this is what I needed to do from now on. And she started to catch it. And then she's like, we are all competitive people. So her response was, oh, I can do that too. I can even do it better. So now you're in this quest that is a wonderful chase of, it changed everything. Now, look, we had a great relationship before, but that principle of 100 to 0, of having zero expectation and realizing that everything you do is between you and God, not between you and your spouse, and everything that she does in response is between her and God and not between her and you. Now look, here's my only concern about that approach. It works if you're both surrendered Christ followers.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, I don't think, if you got, because one of you can exploit it. If you're always the one who's going to say, what, I'm not going to respond the way I might naturally have. Well, you can be exploited by somebody who will take advantage of that. If they're not also a Christ follower who says, no, I'm going to please Jesus too. So I think that's why grounding this relationship, it's not I think we've come to see this. I'm not sure what we've come to see marriage as, but we certainly treat it much more like it's a contract between two people. And you only form contracts with people you don't trust. You write a contract because you think, I'm not going to let this guy screw me in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and form this contract to prevent him from doing that. Well, is that what a marriage contract is? It's all transactional. And I don't want a transactional relationship with Susie.
Yeah.
And so I think this is one of the tricks. And I think this is one of the things we don't want to admit. But it turns out that marriage is good for people. Marriage is good for humans. And the studies show this. And any study that tries to disprove that is actually grounded in a way where the bias is pretty obvious. They're trying to say that, hey, yeah, any form of family unit will work. Really? Well, the data is pretty clear. And by the way, I'm okay if you think that's true, because it won't take very many generations for us to realize that that's a train wreck. Two biological parents in a low conflict setting produce the best results in kids. And if you're a government that wants the next generation of citizens to be the best next generation of citizens they can be, then you ought to want to at least promote and protect two biological parents. Now, you can allow all kinds of other options. I was not raised that way. My parents divorced when I was 3. My mom raised me by herself. So I was not raised that way. I've got 2 adopted children in my family. They're not being raised that way. Okay. It's true. We're going to have blends. I get that. But the goal ought to be, the ideal ought to be, and the thing we ought to try to advance, protect, and even advantage is 2 biological parents in a low conflict setting, because the data shows that's the best. And I think part of that is because, and I noticed this in my own family, I understand my biological children pretty well because I see them doing things that I recognize came from, I know where that came from. That's my problem now being expressed. I can relate. Because so much of our outward behaviors are driven by genetic predispositions, not genetic predeterminations, genetic predispositions. And we can actually resist if we want to, but they are predisposed often to do a certain thing. And I got a lot of that. Like in my family, we are all obsessive compulsives. And if we're not careful, we've got alcoholics and drug addicts and workaholics. Every way you can have that obsessive compulsive expression, expressed, we do it. And so I know that about myself. I know that I see that in my family. I have to be really careful about what is it I'm going to, because I'm going to be all in probably on something. So it's got to be the right thing, because that's just how we are wired.
Well, earlier we were talking about you were talking about practicality, the functionality of going through the world as humans, and wondering, does it work? Because one of the things that I do notice about atheism, for example, is that it claims to have no belief in a meta-narrative and an ultimate meaning, and yet they live their life like every human being does, as though life is meaningful. They try to find meaning. They'll even tell you there's no big story, but we make our own meaning. And I'm like going, well, it doesn't work like that. If that's just a chapter in the book, the entire novel has a beginning, middle, end. It means something. You can have a chapter in that book, but if the whole book is burned, there's nothing left. You don't get to pretend that there's meaning on your little objective viewpoint and pretend like that makes up for the fact that there's no ultimate meaning. We're all going to just die and go into oblivion. When you can't live by your own worldview, it should be rejected. If you have to borrow from an antithetical worldview, something's wrong with yours. But I'm curious about, because people will watch my show, Jim, that are atheists or from different countries or things. And so here's one thing I'm curious about. I think that sometimes atheists don't understand the practicality of Christianity. They maybe see it as oppressive or whatever caricature they've fallen into to make them not have to submit their life to God. Any excuse they can make. But here's one thing I'm curious about. So before I don't know if you were an atheist before you became a Christian, but you were a non-believer to a certain degree, or at least.
No, I was a very outspoken. People in my agency knew that I would probably mock you in some way, or just they wouldn't bring it up around me because
You were
they
an
knew that.
atheist? Would you?
Yeah. Oh no, yeah, for sure.
Oh,
And
that's
I
good.
remember
I'm glad.
I had a partner who we would sadly, so many of the people that we would take to jail would identify as Christians. We didn't have to ask too much more than that, because that was enough for us to mock them, because we felt like. And I remember I just so clearly remember that about a month before I attended that first church service, I remember exactly where I was. I was at Crenshaw and Delamo in Los Angeles County. And we were on some surveillance, and I was talking to my partner about how ridiculous, utterly ridiculous Christians were. And I remember, and then a month later, I was in church, was provoked enough to buy a Bible. Now, I wasn't a Christian probably for another year, but I would have been embarrassed to tell that guy that I was going to church. And then here a year later, and I don't think that guy never became a Christian.
Well, but here's what's interesting. I believe that most atheism is a result of pain, that God didn't show up when they need him. I'm a little kid, but God, my mom has cancer, please heal her. She dies. Okay, screw you, God, I'm out. This is who you are, I'm out. So I think and frankly, Jim, it maybe is the single most difficult topic to try to navigate as a believer, is pain and suffering. It's hard. It's a
well. Let's talk about that for a second, because there's a chapter in this book where I try to deal with it. A couple of things I've noticed about trauma. Now, I would have said, as an atheist, looking back at it, I think pain can trigger. It can expose what the cause is. Can expose why you're out, why you're not a believer. For me, it was absolute self-sufficiency. It's selfishness. It was that I thought there was no need for God, because I never had a need for God. It wasn't that God had an answer to me. I didn't experience trauma really till much later. So it wasn't as though I even had to deal with that. But I knew that these people who are weak enough to think they have to believe in this God are people who, for the most part, have problems. That's why they need God. Now, of course, that's because most of the people I met who would have said they were Christians were people who were in the back of my police car. So that's different, right? That kind of puts you in different categories. So anyway, I'll say this, though, and we talk about this with the officers. You said something earlier about chapters in a book, and I think you're spot on. What typically happens is people are going along in life, and they have a moment of suffering or trauma. Something bad happens. You lose your child, you get divorced, you lose your job, whatever it may be. And trauma is different for different people. So it may not be you have to have a major injury or lose a loved one to experience trauma. It's going to depend on you and how much you experienced in the past, and how important that job was you lost, or whatever it may be, that girlfriend you lost, whatever it may be. But if you experience that point of trauma and you drop to your knees and you can't get back up, and then you stay down there, your level of functioning has been depressed and decreased. Well, we call that post-traumatic stress. And I've got lots of officers who will come up who have already their agencies have already diagnosed them with PTSD, and they're getting ready to retire with PTSD. Wouldn't it be great if you can get back to that level you were at before the trauma? If you can get back to that level again, they call that resiliency. But I know for these officers, the ability is there, if we want it, to actually rebound to a higher level than you were before the trauma. And that's called post-traumatic growth. Now, what is the key? According to secularists, according to atheist studies, key to post-traumatic growth. Well, what they call it meaning making. Now, here's why they call it that. It turns out, what is trauma? How do we define it? Well, here's what it really is. Trauma is anything that you have this worldview coming in, this expectation of the world the way it ought to be. You believe the world is structured a certain way, and then something happens that shatters your view of the world, your view of yourself, your view of reality, your view of the world. And it can be anything that shatters that. And now the question is, can you make sense of this now? In other words, can you find yourself saying, well, maybe my view of the world was wrong. Maybe I need to rethink the way the world really is. And they call this meaning making, but you're right. Is any meaning, can I say, okay, the meaning of the world is that we're in a computer simulation, and this is just part of the programming, and no, look, you can make up meaning. And then what's going to happen is some other traumatic event's going to shatter that one. You need to find, it's not meaning making, it's meaning finding.
Yeah.
So the question is this thing you just experienced, the last chapter in your story, is this how it ends? It's about understanding what's the story and
Yeah.
where do I fit in the story.
And
where,
that the story's bigger than you, too.
yes, exactly. Is there a story that was much bigger than me that I'm just a chapter in that story? So, for example, when you said, yeah, we could make meaning in the world, you could really? Okay, so you're telling me if you're not a believer, if you're somebody who holds a materialist worldview, and you think that your birth was an insignificant event that you come out of the dirt, and it's really insignificant that you're here at all, like Dawkins would say, or Hitchens would say, just about Dawkins would say about the nature of the universe. It's pitiless, it's indifferent, it doesn't care about you. You could have a bad day. Oh, well, it's just the way it is because no one really cares. There's no meaning in any of this. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no anything. It's just a pitilessly indifferent universe. Okay, if that's the case, and your birth is just an insignificant point in history, and your death is just another insignificant point in history, why are you convinced that something in the middle has significance?
Yeah. Right.
The whole thing is insignificant.
No,
and we're
and
all headed toward
especially
a
if
heat
you look
death.
at the big picture. If you look at the big picture, which is the heat death of the universe. I mean, eventually
Right.
it all disappears
But it's
into
even worse than that.
It's all annihilated. Then
Right.
literally, pragmatically, logically, using deductive reasoning, I don't care what you do. The moment you die, you go into eternal unconsciousness. It doesn't matter if you're Hitler.
Look at it this way.
It doesn't matter.
Let's just get really practical. I've written books on the case for Christian. You think my work is going to matter in 6 generations? It might, but I doubt it. Give me an example of this. Norm Geisler wrote probably 50 books. I forget how many he wrote. A huge impact. But when I talk about Norm Geisler today, most of the people in my audience are like, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So it turns out you don't remember you don't even know anything about your great grandparents. And guess what? Your great grandkids won't know anything about you.
Right.
And the fact that we happen to have media right now that's going to look like old grainy 50s letterbox, video that no one's going to care about in 4 generations. We're fooling ourselves to think that any of this has meaning unless there's another story that transcends us.
And I think that's what I try to explain is that the fact that you keep searching for something that intellectually you have convinced yourself doesn't exist, it means you're either a psychopath, something's mentally disturbed with you, you're trying to create a fantasy world to function. Or as C.S. Lewis said, maybe I was made for a different world. Maybe this makes sense. Well, let me follow up on that, Jim, because here's what I was getting at with an atheist that might be watching this. So here you are, an atheist. You are going into crime scenes. I mean, seeing heinous people's heads severed, I get burned alive, brains. I mean, stuff that most of us would go, nah, I don't think I want to play in that world. That's all yours. Enjoy yourself. So let me ask you this, though. So however you navigated that, however you made that manageable psychologically for you, because you had to learn not to turn off your humanity, but certainly to.
Well, let me tell you how bad it is. Cops usually say it this way. It's a mind over matter issue. I don't mind and you don't matter.
Well, there's no other way to do it. You have to dehumanize
There's no other way to do it.
This is just a piece of evidence. You have to dehumanize it, or you couldn't.
Well, that's a terrible way to live.
Every totalitarian regime dehumanizes those who are there about to throw in the gas chambers because they can't do this thing because it's evil. But here's what I was curious about. So let's say you're walking into 18 years, walking into these horrible scenarios as an atheist who cared about finding the solution. You cared about ethics. You cared about morals. You cared about justice. You cared about law. I want to find this guy. This is wrong. Let's figure this out. So you had some ethical worldview that drove you, even if it was just the law. Maybe it's just, I'm a policeman. I'm doing the law. And then you became a believer. And you walked into the same room. What changed? In other words, could you tell an atheist watching this, here's how I saw things, and then I became this other thing. And I walked into these scenarios, but now I have different lenses.
Yeah.
Something has happened differently, and I want you to understand what I've discovered on the other side of the mist of reality that you atheists, as smart as you are, don't see because you've cut off the transcendent as a potential revelation to a fuller life. What made you see things differently, and what was that from the atheist and the Christian walking into the same crime scenario or situation?
Well, I think part of it is, and this is a chapter in the new book, is about this idea that secularists call the persisting self. And what they discovered is that people who believe in the persisting self have less death anxiety, less fear of death. because if you believe that the self does not persist, you're more likely to cherish and hold on in fear that this is going to end. So if you're an atheist who believes that the self dies and you're back in the dirt, and I used to have no problem. I used to think that's no problem. Although as you get older, it starts to become more of a reality, right? But and if you're somebody who maybe a Near Eastern religion, you think that reincarnation is true, well, then you might persist, but not as yourself.
Yeah.
So it's a different version of yourself, a different
Yeah.
person altogether, different memories, different relationships, all of that. But if you believe that there's a view, or maybe you're somebody who believes in a view that all this is an illusion anyway. No, if this is not an illusion and the self persists beyond the grave, well, that changes things. Number one, people who truly lay into that, who are really not just calling themselves Christians, but think deeply about their Christian worldview and what it promises, have less death anxiety. It's just statistically true. Okay, now that's part of it. And also as a detective, what it means is now you're walking into a crime scene full of eggshells. You're no longer walking into a crime scene full of dead people. These are just the shells of people. These are just the material, like these are the eggs aren't there.
Yeah.
The shells are there. And so no one has a problem walking through eggshells. What we have a problem with is that if we don't want to crush eggs, we have so now I'm like, okay, this is how so-and-so left her body. And I've had cases where the deceased were very young and very committed Christians. And so you get there and you're like, oh, you could look at it like, wow, what a tragedy. And that's why it's so important in terms of dealing with trauma, of knowing where you are in the narrative, knowing what chapter you're in. Because, and I've been saying this a lot lately, I'll just say it with you too. If we stop certain stories at certain chapters, they are nothing more than tragedies. So if you stop Job at chapter 2, that's a tragedy.
Yeah.
If you stop the story of Jesus at the cross, that's a tragedy. If you stop the story even of John Mark, who is, Paul tells him, you're not going with us. You're a failure. You bowed out before, and although Barnabas wants to take you with us, we're not taking you with us ever again. Well, that's a tragedy. But it turns out that dude ends up becoming one of Paul's best friends and best associates, and one of Peter's, and ended up sitting at Peter's feet, writing the Gospel of Mark in Rome. And now, when you think of the 4 evangelists, the 4 authors of the Gospels, this nobody who was a failure in the middle of the book of Acts is now amongst the pantheon of gospel authors on par with John. You think of him as like, he's one of the 4 evangelists. Well, because you have to figure out where you are in your own story. And if you stop, and that's why meaning finding is the key to post-traumatic growth. And then the question becomes, well, why would God allow me to suffer? What is he trying to develop in my own character? What opportunities is God trying to open up for me that were not available to me before, that might be available to me now because I've suffered this? It's in 1 Corinthians, is that we are only allowed to suffer this stuff so that we can help others who are also suffering in this.
Yeah.
And I saw this in one chapter of this book. I tell the story of it, but I saw this with one family who lost their daughter, and she was in early 20s, and it was tragic. I mean, it was one of those cases where she's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did nothing to provoke this. Didn't even have bad friendships. Did nothing that you could say, well, if she had done this differently, she wouldn't have got killed. No, it could have happened to anybody the way it happened to her. And because of that, I think the family was just frozen. Just could not process it. And as a matter of fact, had become convinced. I mean, if it stops right there, and it seemed to for them, they literally lived the next 20 years as though they were in the final chapter all along. And they wouldn't, her sister wouldn't marry, wouldn't move on, couldn't form a life for herself. The sister she was closest to seemed like she was frozen in place. And as we opened the case, she was a believer because she was her sister who died was a believer. She was the only younger sister to this woman. So she looked up to her older sister, and when she passed, it shook her. And so what she needed to do was try to figure out, okay, remember, trauma is that your worldview has been shattered. And then she realized, well, my Christian worldview was not quite accurate. I need to rethink how God uses suffering. Why would God allow this to happen to my sister? And the worldview she had, look at Job. Theology matters. It turns out Job's friends are of no help to him because their theology is too primitive. They believe that, hey, the only way you could suffer is that you've got some unrepentant sin that God is punishing. That God would not allow someone good to suffer. You must be bad. And you just haven't met. You got to admit it, Job. You're bad. You're bad. You're bad. And Job's like, I don't think I'm that bad. And we know he's not that bad because chapter 1, we know that's not why he's suffering.
Yeah.
Okay. Theology matters because it changes the way you even treat other people. How you believe, what you think about God, what you think about the universe, your worldview matters. So what we did with her was she found out that I was a Christian, and we began to talk over the period of the years it took to solve this case, maybe 3 years, once I started working it full time. And we just kind of reprocessed her Christian worldview so that she could find the meaning in what had happened in her own life and understand God's larger narrative and how he might use this. And on the back side of this now, she's done conferences with district attorneys. I mean, she's become an advocate. And the reason why I think that makes sense is because as First Corinthians is that she has suffered through something that God intended. And by the way, if the Christian worldview is true, her sister's waiting for us.
Yeah.
We're all going to get to meet her.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of like if I said I'm off to Hawaii, you can't go with me, but I'm going to be there. Am I going to resent that, or I'm going to say, I'll miss you, but you're going to have fun and I'll visit you soon? I mean, that is the case, but it's still hard. I mean, what I don't like to do is make it trite, or simplistic, or let me give you a scripture verse. I feel like that's so insensitive sometimes in Christianity. What I love about our faith, Jim, is that it's so correcting. Like if somebody used the Bible to enslave, the Bible said, well, no, we never said that. You don't get to do that. That's stealing. You get to steal another human being's dignity and freedom and autonomy. No. If you are in an evil culture that does that, let me show you how to do that in a moral way. God just said, I didn't make this, but you did. So let me show you what to do while you're living this nonsense. So so let's sort of quickly scope out your book for people who are interested. Again, it's called The Truth in True Crime. So you've taken a numerous amount of actual cases. I guess you break them down like you do in your other books. Here's what happened. Here's how we found the answers. Here's how we found the clues.
Right.
But you're saying that each one of these also has a very specific topic relating to the human condition.
Yeah. So I know we're going to kind of scream up to the end of this time together, but I'll just tell you this. So what we did with this book is we said, hey, what are the 15 things that you learned? If you could boil it down to 15, I think I had maybe 40 on a list, and I wasn't sure which ones to write about, but I thought I kind of found the 15 that I thought were the most important, at least for this book. And I said, okay, so here's 15 things that typically, if you would embrace these behaviors, how to select good friends, how to actually figure out what is wise and what is unwise, how to identify what identity is such a big issue as a chapter on identity here, how to control your idolatry, how, like we talked about earlier, how to balance that polar nature between justice and mercy, truth and grace, because it's something we have to learn how to do. How to understand why it is we separate from others. Like the ism that behind all isms is not actually racism or ageism or sexism. It's something I call otherism, and I'll explain that one of the chapters in the book. Even the role of hope, why hope helps us to flourish, why our fear of death, something that sociologists call terror management theory, why it turns out our anxiety about death is sometimes the tail that wags every decision we make as humans. These are 15 concepts that really are not concepts that are unique to Christian. Well, they are unique, but they have been studied by people who aren't Christians. And over the last 35 to 40 years, there's a lot of data now that's been assembled in research. And that data simply affirms the things that I was seeing as a detective. So I'm going to tell you a true crime story. I'm going to show you how the data actually confirms that true crime story. Then I'm going to show you how you could leverage this to have a better life. So there's part true crime, part self-help. And then I'm going to show you how this was always in the Bible to begin with. So part theology,
why don't you kind of entice people with some of the chapter topics? Like what will they learn when they?
Well, I think if all that you got out of this book was the chapter on identity, the chapter on the way we ought to mitigate our celebrity, because there's a chapter in here on celebrity.
What does
And
that
all
mean?
of us.
What does that mean?
Well,
Mitigate our celebrity.
What I mean is, so that let's just, well, we can just land it right there then for you, because it turns out that if I asked people who are not Christians, like, what is the one thing you could embrace that would actually raise your level of flourishing in every metric that we measure? You'll live longer, you'll be healthier, you'll have better mental health, you'll have better grades, you'll do better in school, you'll actually learn at a higher rate. You'll make better distinctions between what's true and what's false. You'll make more money. You'll have deeper committed relationships. Every way we measure flourishing, you'll be a better leader. You'll be a better employer, a better employee. Every way we measure flourishing, you'll do better if you embrace this one thing. I think most non-believers would go, I don't know. Well, I don't know.
Well, give us a little clue as to how we embrace
Well, here's
that.
what it is. It's very simple. And the studies show it. The secular studies show it. It's an attribute called humility. It turns out humility is the key to flourishing. It is the key to flourishing. Now, I talk about it in a chapter here because we had a local street legend gangster who was like a celebrity in it. And I think it's important to us to look at our celebrity, because it turns out that so much of the time, you and I, as public figures, have leveraged our celebrity. But celebrity is dangerous, because it's just the opposite of humility. And it's one thing for me to say, well, look, I might be a trusted authority in a very narrow field, but the line between trusted authority and celebrity is pretty thin. And I don't want people to read my books because they think I've been in a movie. As a matter of fact, when I did the movie, I kind of thought, should I do the movie? And this is why, to be honest, now I do a lot less stage presentations, because I'm conscientious of the danger of celebrity. Because what it does is it builds just the opposite. The cure to celebrity is humility. And if you can somehow balance that, you'll flourish. And this is true for all of us. And we see that every time, so of the three things that people do, like sex, money, power, celebrities in that power category. And what we often see with pastors, for example, will say, hey, well, we don't want you to fall, so we're going to protect you from the ways you could fall. And we always think about it in terms of sex and money. But we want our pastors to be celebrities because it builds a bigger congregation. We reach more people if you're better known. We want you to have a podcast. We want you to have a YouTube channel. We want you to do all these things. Trust me, I see this over and over and over again. If you scratch one of these three itches, you will scratch the other two. You think, oh, yeah, it's safe to build. No, it's not. It turns out it was Scarface that said, first you get money, then you get celebrity, then you get the girls. It's just true. It turns out a lot of people who otherwise would not have opportunities to get some of these three things get them because they become famous. So fame is actually dangerous. And it's just the opposite of the quiet life that God is calling us to live in scriptures. Now, if it turns out that there's a worldview out there that advances humility, that might lead to the highest flourishing. And there is no worldview other than Christianity that does this, because a secular worldview is a meritocracy. It's that I'm going to do certain things to achieve certain levels. I'm going to have a transaction with the culture. I'm going to do this to earn this kind of money. In other words, it's all about what can I earn? Same is true for a lot of every theistic system. I'm going to do these 8 things to be in God's presence. I'm going to do these 10 things to earn God's favor. I'm going to do. You'd have to have a worldview that says, no, anything this worldview offers you, we're just going to give it to you as a free gift so that no one can boast. Well, now you've taken because the one thing that leads to pride faster than anything else is the doing. Mike Adams, who Frank Turk and I used to do conferences together with Mike, and before he passed, and Mike used to always tease that he wrote a book, How to Become Humble in 10 Easy Steps, and How I Made It in 8. Okay. Because it turns out that you just know that you cannot pursue humility because the pursuit will become prideful.
Yeah.
So humility is not a pursuit. It is simply a realization. It's, as Spurgeon says, it's the proper assessment of who we are. And a lot of it is, of all the attributes of God's nature that you could focus on, his power, his knowledge, his omnipresence, his grace. If you'll focus on God's holiness, you'll make a proper assessment of who you are. And if that doesn't humble you, then you are not really apprehending God's holiness the way you ought to. So I think for me, and I'm just trying to, and there are some simple things you can do, right, to kind of guard the level to which you start to believe your own press clippings. And let's face it, we're in a world right now, and you and I both know it, where we want more people to watch these videos. We want more followers. We want more. And then at some point, we start to believe that's who we are.
Yeah. No, it is tricky because, in the world of the secular world, the achievement is gauged by data points. I made this much money and you made that much. I won. I have
Right,
this many
right.
watching. I mean, how else do we even know? Frankly, and this is what I was going to ask you, because in a way it's tricky. Part of what the Bible also teaches us is that your faith journey, if it's authentic, should bear fruit. You should see a result of your interaction in your sphere of influence by which people may become Christians or they become healed, or there's some value and significance that comes as a result of you being in their atmosphere. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be.
Okay, so Luther puts it this way. He says, yes, but it turns out that we are so arced toward ourselves. We're so selfish. And that selfishness even drives us toward good behavior, toward moral behavior, but for the wrong reasons. So it's a transaction. If we're saying, yeah, I should do this because this good thing happens, it's a transaction. Again, we're doing it for the wrong reason. He's making this case because he's saying that, hey, even people who think they could somehow earn their salvation are wrong, because even their good works are done for selfish reasons. And by the way, even the secular studies show this, and this is a different chapter of the book that talks about the nature of man. Are we really good by nature, or are we fallen? And what the secular studies show is that we have a great capacity for altruism until resources get tight, and then we hoard toilet paper. Because it turns out that we are capable of doing good as long as there's something in it for us. But the minute it's a you or me issue, it's going to be me. And that's really the nature of what we do. So even when yes, I think of course, I'm aiming at something. But just know this, that we are so deeply in need of a savior that even on our best moral day, we're in every bit the same position of need we were for the savior as we were on our worst moral day, because it turns out our best behavior is wrongly motivated. So I think that's so important for us to read. In other words, it helps me to have a proper assessment of my desperate need. Doesn't mean I'm going to go around pulling my hair out and saying I'm a miserable person and flogging myself. That's not what I'm going to do. But at least I'm aware of the fact. And here's how it helped me. Cops have a bad tendency of saying the entire world is divided between good and bad, instead of between humble and proud. And so if it's between good and bad, then clearly cops are going to say, well, we're the good guys and you're the bad guys. And that division across the table in an interview is pretty palpable in interviews. And you see it if you watch Dateline. You could even see it in the way that we position ourselves at the table. So if that's, you treat people differently when you finally assess who you are accurately. Yes. So for me, it was a matter of saying, okay, once I realized that, yeah, and this is true for cold cases, because these guys do one murder, only one, 30 years earlier. They're not serial killers. And then for 30 years, they look spectacular, just like us, like everybody else. And it makes you realize that spectacular looking people are capable of murder. And we sometimes are spectacular looking people, which means we're also capable. But for the context, but for the grace of God, but for the situation, that could have been us.
Well,
we're no better than they are.
But what about the anointing? In other words, I feel like you do run the risk. Let's say you're a pastor of a mega church, right? Well, it didn't start as a mega church. It was you and a couple friends in your living room. We've heard this story many times. And you just are trying to hear God. You're trying to be humble. You're trying to read the word. You're trying to do whatever. And you see churches all around you, and you've attended them, and some have this many people attend, and some have that many, and you just, whatever, I'm just leaving it as is, and I'm just doing the best I can. And next thing you know, you blew up. It's like they're all just, they want to come to me. And so, I mean, so I'm curious for a pastor, let's say, or anyone in ministry or success who happened to do it well, happened to get the brass ring, happened to bear fruit and wealth perhaps beyond what they feel they deserve. Well, they shouldn't have to apologize for being good at it.
No.
So how do you tread that high wire of, they want to come to my church, I'm not going to apologize, but now I'm something suspect because I'm trying to manage this large group, which is much more difficult. It's much more difficult.
So I think that's a very specific question about managing a church. And here's what I would say to that. I would say two things. Number one, you have to have somebody in your life who's not on the stage and getting all that adoration, who you trust, who you're not going to reject, who always is speaking truth to you, because that person is not experiencing the glow of celebrity like you are. They're just in it with you and saying, what are you doing? Are you starting to believe this stuff? Are you a
Yeah.
knucklehead?
Yeah.
Stop. And what you'll see, people who are starting going off the rails, they typically will push those kind of people out of their lives. They'll push the accountability people out of their lives, and they'll end up kind of running the church in a way that doesn't have, you don't have a trusted ally who can just speak the brutal truth to them anymore. They don't want to hear that voice. That's